My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale, and every tale condemns me for a villain. It is that thing we do not talk about, that in the deepest corner, in the recesses of our mind and our soul and our being, comes forth within our own passion to tell story. For there is no good without evil. It's the darkness that is the most fascinating aspect of what we do. It has the most depth. It has the most reach. It incorporates the most forethought. So here, this season on 21 Grams, we examine the part of the soul that we often try to bury or not talk about. They say that 21 grams is the weight of the soul. But what is the weight of sitting in darkness? This is what we aim to discover this season. Welcome to 21 Grams with your host, Joe Compton. Hello, everybody. Welcome to 21 Grams, and I am super excited to have my guest here with me today. He's a gentleman I've gotten to know over the last year or so, and been a frequent contributor on This Week in Indies. This is the first time we've got him outside of that box and brought him here, and the first time I get to talk to him one-on-one, so I'm real excited all about that. Mr. Ben Schenkman, everybody. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Ben, for those who don't know you.
Yeah, hi. For anyone who has not seen me on many of the other Going to Now conversations, I'm Ben Schenkman, urban fantasy author and audiobook narrator. I've got two distinct series out right now with a third on the way, and I can't wait to talk about villainy with you, Joe.
My brother's keeper. Very interesting. I was fascinated by the blurb. It's very interesting. It sounds like a more personal story than you're normally telling, Ben. Is that fair to say?
It is for actually a number of reasons. So the funny thing is, the blurb talks about the fact that Max comes home to bury his twin brother. So I am an identical twin. My brother is alive and well. And I told him when I thought about this idea, I'm like, I need you to understand, I am not metaphorically killing you in a book. This is not about you. But it's an intensely Jewish story. And I'm Jewish. Like, I'm Jewish. Both sides of my family are Jewish, though Judaism is usually matrilineal. And I was bar mitzvahed and I went to Hebrew school and all that stuff. But like, I was raised Reform and I really moved away from it other than kind of culturally. And so, yeah, this book is really diving into a lot of the fantastical culture that I wasn't even aware of. Like the amount of demonology and magic in the Torah and supporting texts like the Talmud is like decidedly non-zero. There is so much demonology in there. It's fascinating.
How much older is the Torah versus the Bible? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a couple hundred years, isn't it? Something like
it's the OG. It's the Old Testament, so
right.
Distinctly older than the Bible. I'm not a scholar in that sense.
Yeah.
I'm Jewish. Don't ask me when the Bible came out. I don't actually know.
What came out as zero is right, which is just stupid. But yeah, that's cool. I like that. What struck me about having this conversation with you about villainy and darkness and everything is, in having just read one of your series in one of your books, is there is a distinct way in which you present villainy, and it's not the obvious way to present villainy. And I love that. I love the idea that you kind of go old school action movie villainy, where you have a person that we think is the villain, or at least we think is the main villain, and they turn out to be pretty much the henchman of the main villain, and you haven't really you discover over time who the real main villain is. Is that kind of where that comes from? Is that kind of like an old school thought process for you? Was that just a natural thing you discovered in your writing process? How how did that become a part of your lexicon?
I love a good twist. And to be fair, not all the twists are villain related.
Yeah,
Though some of them are, but like, and it's kind of funny that you mentioned that actually. So you read "Let Sleeping Gods Lie,"
yeah.
which is the first book in the Chronicles of Corbin Pierce, and it the you suspect who the bad guy is the whole time, and in the end the bad guy kind of is the bad guy, but it's a bigger problem. It's the irony of that story is not really it's not a mystery the way that mysteries are mysteries. That's why it's an urban fantasy, because it's a story that's really telling more about choices and sacrifice and the interactions with other people, but also like the thing that always strikes me when it comes to villains and bad guys is it rarely should be as simple as it seems. And so yeah, that idea that like we think we know who's responsible, but in the end this is really just the tip of the iceberg, and then we get exposed to who the true villain is like part of, I think, the way that my brain likes to like twist things.
I mean, you do follow villainy tropes, and we have some people in the chat here, and Celtic Blue Tune. Hello, everybody. Um, but there is a it's that old adage trope, which I think is very effective, and it's been something we've talked about a lot on this show, and that is the villain's perspective is the right perspective from the villain's point of view in a lot of respects, and you follow that pretty religiously in terms of especially Sleeping God's Lie. It's very very apparent, but it's also Corbin's view that kind of shadows that, and it's weirdly parallel to one another, and that's kind of the interesting dynamic of it.
So that's the funny thing about um the spectrum of good to evil, right? um
Mhm.
it's it's shades of gray, and yeah, the villain is the hero of their own story, and that absolutely plays out in a lot of my books, in that the people who are doing the worst things are surely doing them for what they believe is the right reasons. And that's actually what I think makes a really good villain, is a
Mhm.
connection to some kind of purpose or humanity. And I don't necessarily mean like a Bond villain, like
Right.
mustache twirling kind of way, because they have a purpose. They feel like they're doing things for the right reasons. But like, if you take uh the who gets introduced as potentially the bad guy, by which I mean like he's introduced as Corbin's nemesis, which is Alexander Hughes, the leader of the
Mhm.
Hand, which is that secret cabal of magic.
Mhm.
And he's got students, he's got a regular haunt that he goes to have drinks with people, he's a
Right.
customer, he's a loyal customer of the shop. Like, he's not like a guy that just wanders around in the basement, like smacking the dangling chains and thinking about how bad he is.
And yeah, and he plays more of like a foil in terms of like he's like the rival more, right?
Yeah.
And that's why Corbin really views him as a bad guy. Corbin's really the one who sets that narrative, really, for
Mhm.
that,
Yeah,
Uh,
he's the nemesis.
right, right. And Something Blue says, "I love villains that are so good at it. You don't realize they're villains until the end." Vlad was never a villain to his own country. So yeah, it is fast. And Shades of Grey is exactly how I would describe it as well, and especially the way you write it, and very interesting. So in that respect, I mean, giving your protagonist and antagonist darkness to both deal with, that has to be, is that the balance that you achieve with trying to get into the greatness, or do you feel like you can do that to the antagonist and still have a pure protagonist?
I don't. So let me just be clear with one thing. My characters are not morally gray in the sense that like the common trope of morally gray main characters is. But my characters are well intentioned, but the way they go about things may or may not be strictly the right way to do things. So yeah, I don't think just as villains are not purely bad, heroes are not purely good. And I think that's what gives depth to them. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not going to spoil it, but you know what happens at the end of
Mm-hmm.
Let Sleeping Gods Lie. Like, we clearly get some insight into the lengths that people will go. You know, in if you think about novel writing, and specifically, like, I use beat sheets and I like Save the Cat, and one of the things that Save the Cat suggests that you do is figure out what what's the theme, like what's the theme of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And the theme of Let Sleeping Gods Lie is, how far will I go to protect the things I love?
Mm-hmm.
And so that plays into what the hero does, that plays into what the villains do, that plays into what the side characters do. It's this idea that pervades the whole thing. And rarely do we get such clean choices that we can say that they're purely good or bad.
And the other thing about it too is that you dance them into a corner, and they dance out of the corner, but they're never the same once they get out of that corner. And it's kind of that's also a reflection of darkness and gray. Is you are affected by whatever you decide to go for and experience.
Yeah, so growth is important, and you say that they dance into the corner and they dance out. I think in some cases they dance, like they dance themselves into a corner, but then they're stuck and they have to break through the wall in order to get out. So like they
Fair enough.
so growth shouldn't be easy. And
Yeah.
this is also like the thing that I dislike about a lot of the like enemies to friends even trope, where like the bad guy becomes the good guy. And like, I love a good redemption arc, but not everyone deserves a redemption arc.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you put the bad guy in the corner and you give them the choice to either break through the wall and grow and learn from their mistakes, or stay there and continue being evil,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they just stay there, and that's okay. Like, not everyone needs to be redeemed.
Well, and that also, I think of like a Thanos in that respect, right? Where they put him in a corner, he decides to stay in the corner and says, "Kill me, if you don't like it." Right? He's basically daring them to break their oath and break their morality in order to change his, and that's kind of what the villain does, right? It pushes the hero to make a choice whether they want to be moral or not.
Yeah, Thanos is an interesting one though, because like, so I don't always love a villain that's so hard. I mean, he is literally the definition of, I have cosmic power and I'm going to use everything possible to achieve this goal that isn't actually like good for anyone except
Except for
me.
him.
Like,
Yeah.
I've decided that this is so important that I'm going to do it to the detriment of literally everyone, and frankly, including myself.
Right.
So like, it's an interesting example, because that's, you know, the an early reader of my new novel, My Brother's Keeper, actually talks. He one review, and it's out there. So like, I'm not saying anything about, like, I obviously I'm not naming names. That review is valid. The opinions are valid. I'm not saying anything about that. But like, this one particular reader thinks that my villains are too one note
Mm,
in My Brother's Keeper. Um, but like, truly, Thanos is a one note villain. There is no subtlety about anything that he does. Everything that he does is for the singular purpose, and the singular purpose is to just destroy the world and
mhm.
burn everything down because of this experience that he had. And like, that I don't that's kind of boring to me. I hate to say it that way. Like I loved the Marvel movies, so don't get me wrong. But like the whole Thanos thing is like really the only reason this is happening is because there's this guy that's already basically unstoppable, and now we have to suffer not stopping him. Like, what's the deal?
Well, I think there's a tiny bit of nuance that you're leaving out, and that is that he doesn't get unstoppable until he realizes he can be unstoppable, right? So,
Fair.
I mean, he was tough. He was tough on his own without the invincibility cloak that he creates, but he was fallible in that respect. Now, and becoming infallible is where his head grows to enormous lengths, and he even commits atrocity against himself to save that infallibility in a lot of respects. So,
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. As an author, if you write yourself into a corner where the only way to save the timeline is to use time travel, then like it's debatably a problem.
Very true, very true. Yeah, I think I think motivations have to be, and that's one of the things I loved about Sleeping Gods is the motivations are very clear of every character that you have, and I think that you have to see their lane in order to understand how this all is going to play out, right? And that's it's very like I said in my review, feels like very Indiana Jones to me, because that's exactly what Indiana Jones goes through, right? He has his demons, he has his quirks, but he has a mission and an idea of what he wants to do, and everything in his way, he's got to push it out of his way to get there, right? And
You know my log line for Let Sleeping Gods Lie, though, right? It's Indiana Jones meets Harry Dresden in Lee Bardugo's Ninth House, but works for Greenpeace. So like the Indiana Jones analogy is spot on.
And Harry Dresden, that's an interesting one too. So I appreciate that too. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I'm and then your previous series, dealing with supernatural elements and things of that nature, is what do you feel about that as a cheat code for villainy? Do you feel like that is a cheat code for villainy, or do you feel like there's avenues you can explore where you can make it a lot greater?
Are you saying? Sorry, tell me more what you mean about the last series with the cheat code for villainy.
Well, having a devil or an omnipotent being involved in the storylines, right?
So the thing that I love to do the most is to make the most powerful thing probably not the villain. If you read The Devil, so it's got 3 books out right now, and we start out with My Boss is the Devil, where we're introduced to Lucifer. The question through the first book is the devil the bad guy? But my penchant as an author is that my villains are almost always a combination of it's other people and capitalism. Like those are usually the chief villains in my books. Is if you look at what happened, chances are you can boil it down to other people being bad, and like human beings being bad, because the real villainy, like it's not the devil. The devil might not be the villain, but the true villainy is the harm that people do to each other.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're using supernatural, like highly powered supernatural figures or embodied deities or whatever, and you're using that as a shorthand for encapsulating evil, I think that probably lacks some nuance. So yeah, if I went into My Boss is the Devil and you met Lucifer and he was smoking a cigar and like, I got to make you a deal, kid, kind of like stereotype, like I could buy that. But like when you get a smooth talking devil who really just wants what's best for you, then like that's the real question. So yeah, I don't that series doesn't have a shorthand for villainy, not exactly. Each book handles it a bit differently, but like books 1 and 2, the villains are definitely part of humanity, and in book 3 it gets complicated, but that one's a little more supernatural, I guess, from the end of things.
Well, I'm more in generalization of an idea of you had to have thought about what am I going to do with omnipotence in a lot of respects, in terms of how I'm going to make it different, how I'm going to make it unique to my storytelling style and everything like that. And that
Oh yeah.
and that had to. I would imagine playing with that darkness was an interesting exercise for you yourself as a person writing that. Would you say that's fair?
It is. I'll say the thing that I mostly do is I don't none of my supernatural characters are omnipotent, even if they are powerful. And even if powerful, the thing that I tend to do is I make them extremely fallible.
Mhm.
Because just because you have great power does not mean that you are not a well-meaning idiot. And and so like one of the best ways because again, think about so personification of deity. Let's
Mhm.
take that word, person. You have to make them at least a little bit human. And so that I think brings it closer. Because again, like walking through a graveyard isn't scary because ghosts are real. Walking through a graveyard is scary because there are people who may do bad things to people in a graveyard at night. So like, but if you couple that with a fallible personified deity, then maybe they make the same kinds of mistakes that humans do.
Mm, I love that. You also do something very interesting to me is like when you are heading toward a darker corner, you kind of, I don't want to say like soften it or make light of it, but there's some kind of punchline involved, some kind of joke involved in it. Is humor is humor important? Is that important? I don't know. I guess jumping out point for you. Or do you feel like humor has to be a part of what you're exploring in darkness as well?
I think it does, but it's if if I was writing a really hard genre, like not that urban fantasy can't be a hard genre. Like when I say hard, I mean like razor's edge kind of
Yeah,
like book.
like dark horror or something to that.
Yeah, if I was writing that kind of stuff, then I feel like within the genre, softening that blow would be wrong
Mm,
because it wouldn't read to the audience the right way. But I think a lot of what urban fantasy does is I think it invites a lot of opportunity for satire, and softening the blow of something deep and dark helps some people get through it.
hmm
And I do think humor is important. Like it's how we cope as humans when bad things happen to us. Graveyard humor. That's why it's called that, right?
Right,
Like the deepest, darkest things could be happening, but I am absolutely going to make a joke about it, because it's the only way that you can laugh yourself through your existential crisis.
hmm
Is so yeah, I think it's very important to add bits of humor as appropriate. Like there are definitely times where I don't do that because like it's a really heavy moment and I want it to be heavy. I will say My Brother's Keeper has a slightly grittier, like noir feel to it, which
hmm
I wrote intentionally. But that's as much trying to differentiate the series as anything else,
hmm
because that's another thing is like trying to get my series to feel tonally different is something I've tried to put some effort into. And so
hmm
like I probably, if you read My Brother's Keeper on the back of Let Sleeping Gods Lie, you'd probably be like, oh, there's maybe a little less humor in this one. So I
hmm
think it depends on the story you're trying to tell, and also it's first person point of view.
hmm
Most urban fantasy is, I tend to think it's weird when urban fantasy isn't first person, but that's just me.
Me too.
If your main character is sarcastic and self-effacing, then they are going to approach the bad things that are happening with a certain amount of that graveyard humor just to survive. And so, yeah, for Corbin's case, there's no way he's not like mentally making a comparison to something potentially inappropriate at the wrong times.
Do you feel like that's part of the reflection of you that's most apparent in these books too? You know, because you strike me, you know, having conversations with you in the past, that you're a very funny guy, and you have some moments where you diffuse a lot of things with humor. And so do you feel like that's a big tell of you, is like you're putting a lot of you into that as well?
It absolutely is. The jokes are stream of consciousness, like, or not necessarily the joke, but like the satirical elements, like those are, as I am writing, those happen, and then chances are they stay. Yeah, and also I'm going to quote you on that. Joe Compton said I was funny once, and that's it. I've peaked.
I'm curious how much gets cut. Have you cut a few that you didn't find worked? That's interesting.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I'm a weird author, and I say that understanding that I exist in a sea of weird authors. But like my writing process is pretty fluid, and I don't tend to make a lot of changes. So yeah, that kind of stuff probably stays, especially if I think it's entertaining. Like if my alpha readers read it and they're not like, oh, that's funny. Sometimes things will get cut if they don't land right.
Yeah.
But like I read my work aloud to my partner, Kat, and like I will read something and then like look over, like waiting to see if it landed right, like if that moment did. And if they don't laugh, I'm like, oh, was that not funny? And they're like, oh no, that's funny. I just didn't, I was not here momentarily. Yeah.
It's very rare that they don't land right.
So Celtic is actually my pre-alpha reader. She like has access to my Google Docs as I write and is like, that was funny. Or like, I don't think that one was funny.
Hi, Sean. Nice to see you. Yeah,
Hi,
that's awesome. I love all that. And you know, it's endearing too. I think we're so caught up in trying to find that emotional swing point in a lot of, especially urban fantasy does it quite a bit, where they're trying to find that moment when they can sway you into one spot or another. And I think that's what's super refreshing about the way you write is you're swayed right from the beginning of the book. You really got a good sense of who Corbin is right from the beginning, chasing what essentially is the stupidest thing he could ever chase in the history of mankind. You know, and then, you know, from that point forward, it all has relevance to what's going on throughout the rest of the book. But it is also like your James Bond moment where it's kind of like, it's relevant, but it's not relevant to the main story of what we're about to experience. So you kind of give us like a little anecdote, very similar to like James Bond or Indiana Jones. And that's where I felt it. I really felt it right up from the beginning. And yeah. I'm interested in, you know, have you read a lot of urban fantasy where you felt like that is just the wrong way to approach it?
So urban fantasy is, as a genre, often almost to the point of always. Like you can't say always because it isn't, you know, there's no absolutes in writing. But urban fantasies are very character driven. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't give me a relatable character that I can root for, then I feel like that is the wrong way to go about it. And I've read some urban fantasies even recently that I'm like, I don't know that I care one bit about this character, and that's a problem. And again, like, not to go back to it too much, but Save the Cat. The whole idea is that's the joke. The joke of Save the Cat is, how do I endear my main character to my readers? Well, you have them jump off a building to save a raccoon. That's my book. But they save a cat. You have to humanize your characters, and this is where like the morally gray nonsense gets me sometimes, is because I don't want to root for a character that is so morally gray that they would kick the cat instead of save the cat. And it's like, so yeah, I feel like, and the same thing, honestly, going back to the whole villainy thing. I don't want to look at a villain and like them too much. It's the other, it's the opposite. Is like, if you give me a villain that is too likable, I'm really curious why. Because if this is the bad guy, I'm supposed to be anti the bad guy. Unless like the whole point of the book is a mixed up swapping redemption arc where the bad guys are the good guys and the good guys are, but fine, whatever. But like, yeah, if you don't give me a relatable, understandable character that is worth rooting for as they go through their trials, then I'm just going to wonder why they haven't died yet.
Yeah, I find that a lot of urban fantasy really sticks to the lore and really wants to push the lore more than they want to push the characters sometimes. And I think that's unfair, because I've read a lot of really good urban fantasy that doesn't do that and mixes the two together. But I do feel like bad urban fantasy, that's where it kind of goes off the rails, is when the lore overtakes everything you're trying to accomplish with the characters.
Yeah, it may come down to genre conventions. That's a different G word. So think about it. If people are very used to epic fantasy, right? Epic fantasy usually but also like the longest, in some cases, most interminable books. And epic fantasy builds. It does. There's a lot of this like slow burn building up of everything in these epic fantasies. And then some people try to apply those kinds of things to urban fantasy, but then as a genre, it is not necessarily built for, you can have a slow burn in an urban fantasy. Again, genre conventions are worth examining and then deciding whether or not they are worth breaking. But I wouldn't want to write 180,000 word urban fantasy, because frankly, urban fantasies aren't, to me, they're not supposed to be the size of Brandon Sanderson books. Like, they're supposed to be digestible, fun to read, maybe poignant, but like, again, it's a fantasy set in the modern world, usually with elements of mystery or thriller or horror. And yeah, I just I agree. Give me a relatable character and a digestible book size, and I'll be happy.
Was part of the appeal for you to write in urban fantasy because you could do first person and delve that way into it?
I think so. Urban fantasy is also one of my favorite genres to read, like always was. Let Sleeping Gods Lie is a direct inspiration from Charles DeLint's Newford series, if you're familiar at all with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so first person, it was always going to be first person. Could I write a book in third person? I could. I did. Like, I co-authored a dungeon core like fantasy romp with my friend AJ Poppy Alexander's. But I really prefer first person, because you get so much more from like living inside the character's head. I don't know. It's also easier to. I like first person and I like third person close. Like third person, where the point of view of the third person is basically as close to first person as it can get without being inside.
You're devil on the shoulder, right? Kind of way. Yeah.
And yeah, so I really just enjoy that perspective, both reading and writing. but I think it's the easiest way to convey a lot of the things that I'd like to convey.
We live in a climate, and I know, we've had this conversation, and our conversations, even if we're talking about using vowels in using adverbs in writing, we end up talking about the state of our nation somehow, some way. We figure out a way to politically veer that way. It's just how we're made up, and we're in this really turbulent climate right now, and the one thing that always struck me that's very interesting is famous comedians have always said the best material comes from the most turbulent times, right? And have you ever thought about what if you were to get what you wanted out of the political climate, if something were to if the ship was to right itself a little bit, how that would affect you as a writer? Or do you feel like, because I imagine a lot of this edge, like you said, a lot of your books are me versus capitalism, or worldview, damned, I'm this person, right? And so, have you ever imagined a utopia scenario for yourself in terms of where you would be writing wise?
So let me jump into it sideways, because My Brother's Keeper was the book that I wrote in response to how I felt about the current administration.
Yeah.
And this is also a bit ironic, because again, I had an earlier reviewer say that the characters who are politicians are too like evil for the sake of evil. And I'm like, have you looked at our politics currently? Like, I'm pretty sure I could not exaggerate the evil of politicians if I tried right now.
Yeah.
And so like your mileage may vary, but like my one of the characters in My Brother's Keeper is a stand-in for me being able to let out some rage about the current administration. So yeah, if you hate the current administration, go pre-order my book, because you'll enjoy part of it at least. But yeah, like, will I become less a creative person if?
Well, no, that's not what I mean by that. You know what I mean? I'm thinking more of along the lines of, will you write fluffier material? Will your approach to how you write change a little bit more than because right now you're built on angst, you're running on angst, and that is fueling where your gray is coming from. But can you get to a gray in a different way?
Yeah, but Joe, I'm also depressed, so I feel like that might even out. Like, if the bad goes away, then like the depression might ease, because it's situational in some cases. I have ideas for like cozy things that are not on the docket right now, because I have other things going.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I'll sleep real good for like a month afterwards whenever something finally breaks. But I don't see my creative process changing. The other problem is, like, I need you to understand, Joe, I have an anxiety disorder. I'm a wreck as a human being. And so like, I don't need the trauma to be fresh. I just need to have experienced it. And I can just re-experience it by thinking about it. And so yeah, it's relatively easy for me to go back to the well of like, man, I need to think about a villain. Let me just travel back in time 3 years and think about all these terrible things, So maybe it won't be as fresh, but I feel like we've experienced.
But there might be a nostalgia attached to that, right? So,
yes, I mean, like, the generational trauma is strong right now.
And it's also very prominent in your culture, right? I mean, the Jewish culture has been suffering for 200, 300 years, right?
Sorry, there's a parody song called "Because We Suffered." Yeah, it's
And
a trope.
I'm saying that I'm not trying to belittle that or make light of it. I'm saying
No, 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 no.
that's the honest truth about it. You know.
Joe, I am the Jew in the room who is telling you that like it is a stereotype and a trope that like the biggest thing that Jewish people have going is how much we like to complain about how much we've suffered.
Yeah.
And stereotypes exist for a reason. Obviously, this is not like something that's true for everyone. But I will say that that yeah, my people have a banked history of trauma that we're still working out every Passover.
It's one of my favorite things in Annie Hall, the opening joke of Annie Hall, where he talks about the two Jewish ladies at lunchtime, and the one lady goes, "The service has gotten really bad here," and she goes, "Yeah, in such small portions." You know, it's like, they're trying to one up each other with the complaints, right? So
You don't want stories about like my family get-togethers where like as soon as someone mentions who's sick with what, then
yeah.
it's just like, oh, so and so. Oh, did you know they have cancer? Oh, their son died. Oh, it's like the suffering Olympics is alive and well at most like family gatherings.
I am curious too, because you know one of the interesting things about the Jewish culture is its approach to death. It has a very unique way of approaching one of the most darkest aspects of our lives. You know, and in you know you said Shiva. You have to all the very interesting and finite rules that are applied to that moment in time, and it's almost sombering. We're making light of the suffering aspect of it, but it's almost a sombering, like it's almost a cleansing, of a cathartic cleansing in a lot of respects. And I'm curious, have you tackled that in your writing yet, and is that something that you look forward to talking about a little bit down the road? I mean, My Brother's Keeper might tip on that, maybe a little bit.
Joe, I need you to understand you just described like the opening scene. So my My Brother's Keeper starts with Max coming home. So the opening scene is in the graveyard where it's the ceremony, it's the burial. And it talks about the tradition of laying a shovel full of dirt
Mm-hmm.
on the grave, but using the wrong side of the shovel so that it's more difficult and painstaking.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that I tell about it, so at one point, so in like this is the first chapter, no spoilers. Max talks about his father, their father, going to a funeral for his best friend, and after one or two shovelfuls of dirt, he just kept going and just keeps going. And that was my father. So my father, when we buried his best friend, Maurice Mo, uh, that's what happened. He was just, his grief was so strong that like the action of laying someone to rest in the Jewish culture is the last thing that you can do for them, is effectively to tuck them in one more time.
Mm-hmm.
And my father's grief was such that he just kept going, and I carried that memory with me for years. And it ended up in this book. But yeah, the Max go and the family, like his sister-in-law, his nephew, they go home and they deal with Shiva.
Mm-hmm.
They deal with the visitors. They deal with the all the food that the mourners bring to try and help so that you don't have to cook, and the stories that people tell, and the the awkward conversations with the people that you half met once. So yeah, absolutely. If all of that sounds like an urban fantasy that you're interested in, that's My Brother's Keeper. That's all part of it. It talks about all of that.
Is there is it nice to write something that you're I mean, you said you're Jewish, but you're not practicing.
I'm
But
yeah.
is it nice to write something about your culture and be authentic about it? Do you feel like that quells the darkness that you're talking about a little bit, or do you feel like that probably, or does it deepen it for you?
I really do love. So I've never okay. I'm rarely one of those people that goes like, well, I don't see a lot of Jewish representation, except like in urban fantasy. There is some, but there is not a lot
Mm-hmm.
of Jewish main character representation in fantasy books in general. But then, because fantasy books don't usually invent a fantastical religion called Judaism, it's really like urban fantasy is where you have an opportunity to have Jewish representation.
Mm-hmm.
And and yeah, I think it was very special for me to be able to do that. And it's connecting me back to part of my culture that I've felt disconnected from for a long time. And I learned things about Judaism, about our practices, that were new information for me. I still wrote it from the perspective of a Reformed Jew,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to write from the perspective of any type of orthodoxy, because
Sure.
I don't have that experience. Um, but yeah, I think it was really meaningful to me to be able to say, hey, I wonder where the Jewish urban fantasy is, and to say, oh, here it is. And it seems to have hit well with people too. Like, people are responding well to learning some things about Jewish culture,
Hmm.
even if it's in a fantasy book.
How was it for you after writing it? Did you feel like you had reached a rainbow pot of gold? Did you feel like you let an exhale out? How was it? How was your dealing with at the aftermath of having those words on the screen for you?
You keep asking these questions, and as you're asking them, my smile like grows, because I'm like, it's just it's so, folks at home, I did not know what questions Joe was going to ask. I knew what the big reveal, which, for the
Mhm.
record, like I told you, I like twists.
Yeah,
This book has a twist in it that even people who normally see twists didn't.
nice.
And
I'll look forward to
I
the challenge.
I wrote this book knowing what that twist was, and the reveal of it. I had to write an entire book just to be able to write the reveal. And yeah, when I wrote the final words and I put it down, like, I I had finished something.
Uh,
And again, not to I don't I'm I tend to be a humble person. I don't like to say, like, well, that's, I wrote something
sure.
amazing, because I feel like I'm too self-effacing for that. But
Well,
my
that's the
brothers keep
depression, right? That's where you.
that's the yeah, it's the anxiety and the people
Yeah,
pleasing,
yeah.
Joe. I'm working on all of these things. I am at this point properly medicated, so I'm able to take a little more credit for things these days. Uh, but no, my brother's keeper is so far the best thing that I've written,
Sure.
and I'm extremely proud of it. And the feeling that I got afterwards was definitely like, this is something. I really feel like this is something. To the point where I even went out on submission with it for a while, but like eventually kept my indie self indie, because I don't have time to wait for other people to decide that my book is good enough to publish.
And it's funny because like urban fantasy is kind of a niche genre, but it's not as it's becoming more mainstream. Thanks to Dresden's and things of that nature, right? So
Yeah,
it's
it's doing great if your name's Butcher.
right, or Sanderson,
Yeah,
yeah, or even still rolling, even though
yeah.
just kind of stubbed her toe with that one. But and then you also have another gentleman in Gaiman who can go fuck off into this
Yeah,
atmosphere,
they
right?
they all can.
Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting that you had that thought though. That's kind of I'm that's curious to me. But yeah, but when you when you're is that something you discern after you're writing it? Do you feel like when you set out to write something, or do you have an idea of whether you're going to be indie or not with it, or do you wait until you're finished to make that idea to make that choice?
Now, so my last two books, so Let Sleeping Gods Lie and Now My Brother's Keeper, I went out on submission with both of those as an experiment,
Uh-huh.
knowing full well that my timetable does not really allow for traditional publishing unless I went with like a really small publisher. And at that point, I don't actually feel like small publishers tend to do much for independent authors that they can't do for themselves. And so I kind of knew in the end that I was going to be taking them indie. And at this point, I'm not going to bother trying to go trad for any of my books because, like, I'm not an ancient person, but like I'm 45. I don't want to wait 3 years for an agent to decide that my book is good enough to
Yeah.
publish and then wait another 3 years for it to hit the shelves. Like, why would I do that to myself?
Right.
Like being an independent author is challenging, but it's rewarding every time. Like you read that book and you said it was one of your favorites for last year, and that was all I needed. Like that tells like that's the kind of feedback that makes me happy to have made the choices that I've made. In that all I want is my books to be read and to find their audience. And I feel like I'm doing that. And so like that's success to me. I still have a day job. I'm not going to be quitting it for any time in the foreseeable future. But I'm just going to keep putting books out.
Is that the aim? Is to be full time at some point?
It's my retirement plan. Like when I eventually, assuming that the fall of capitalism doesn't happen the way that we all expect, and that
You're
I'm
right.
going to be, like hunting rats for my dinner.
We're living the dystopian lifestyle
Yeah.
instead of writing it.
Exactly. Too busy living dystopia to write it. Yeah, would I love to be full time? I don't actually know. But yeah, it's my current retirement plan, and that if I have enough to live off of doing other things in retirement, I will write full time because I can at that point.
Nice. The last thing I wanted to hit on before I let you go, I am curious. You mentioned this. You already mentioned this, which is great. Talking about the more words you write, the more you feel like you're finding your stride. But it feels like to me that you have a really strong sense of voice. Like your voice. You know what's going to work for you. Did you discover that early on, or was that something that you wrestled with quite a bit before putting out, the next series and now this new series?
No, it all just kept going. Like My Boss is the Devil is the first book that I ever wrote. Like I wrote poetry, I wrote short stories and things like that. But My Boss is the Devil was the first book I ever wrote, and it's the first book I published. And it snowballed after that. I wrote the second one, I wrote the third one, then I wrote Let Sleeping Gods Lie, then I wrote My Brother's Keeper, then I wrote Underleveled, then I wrote the fourth book in the series. Now I'm writing the second book in the Corbin Pierce series. And I think I am somewhat blessed in that the voice that I write in is the voice in my head. And so like I feel like my voice is well developed enough because I tend to write it's my inner monologue. I'm not saying that I'm like, not all of these characters are self inserts. That's not like the what I'm trying to say. But the way that they think is often the way that I think, and the way that I approach humor and satire and good versus evil. And so I feel like I also just write them like real people, you know? And that's one thing I think that a lot of people who are trying to write character driven stories don't necessarily get right, is making their characters real people. And if you don't have reviewers that are reading your book and saying, I found these characters intensely relatable, then like, think about why people aren't saying that about your characters.
You're right.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, if I write a review and I tell you the sunset was nice that you described, you know, if that's what I got out of it, that's not a good thing. Trust me, because I'm like you. I like characters. I like feeling their fallibility. I like to feel their vulnerability. I like all those things that make us who we are, kind of reflected in what I read as well. So, you know. I just want to mention to everybody above me, you've seen the QR code above me. Will lead you to all of Ben's treasures. We'll let Ben tell you where you to go here in a moment, but that is certainly something you can click on. And I should have said that at the beginning, and now that we're at the end. But you know, you still got 4 or 5 minutes that you can click on that, and you can always go back and click on it. It's been up since we started, so that will lead you all the way to Ben's Amazon page where he has all his books listed there. I just decided, you know, Ben's got so much good stuff, you want to read it all. So go ahead, go to that and to take that on and do that, because Sleeping Gods, especially, awesome book, awesome. I just really ate it up with a spoon. It was my cookie dough ice cream fun book to read, so I was real excited about that. So
fantastic.
I thank you, Ben, for doing this. It was really everything I had hoped it would be, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you for the first time, but not the last time, hopefully. And thanks for indulging me and talking about villainy and kind of going deep into it. I really appreciate it. And tell everybody where they can get these wonderful books of yours and find out more about you.
Okay, so to find out more about me and to sign up for my newsletter, because then you
go.
get a free short story, which is the prequel to My Boss is the Devil.
Nice.
You should go to benschenkman.com. And then you can find all of my socials there, link up, send me notes, tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. I love hearing from my readers. But otherwise, you know, my ebooks are all tied to Amazon right now because they're in Kindle Unlimited. But then my paperbacks and hardcovers you can get from any retailer that you prefer. I also have audiobooks for my first 2 books that I narrate and produce myself. And those are available widely, with the 3rd book in progress, but the winter is cold and my booth is in the basement and it's cold down there. So I'm working on it.
That might be the most Jewish thing you've said all this interview.
Have I told you how cold it is downstairs?
Well, thank you, Ben, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us and all the wonderful comments and everything like that. If you're here for the first time, please like, subscribe, do all the wonderful things you do. And stay with us, because right after this, we go live again with Hit the Dice, our live play show. We have Mr. Christopher Halton of Darkland Games playing his Action Heroes, one of the most popular indie RPGs out there. And he's going to run some of our folks through it, and I won't spoil. There's a certain something that goes along with it. I'll let Sean spoil it for you, but there's something exciting happening within this realm, so go there and find out what that is and check that out. That's happening immediately after we get off the air here. And thank you, Ben, for being here, and thank you all for joining us, because it's always time to go indie now. Bye, everybody.